A quiet flight turns explosive when Barron Trump refuses to remove his MAGA hat. What happens next sends shockwaves across the nation, sparking debates, outrage, and an unexpected act of grace that no one saw coming. The flight was already buzzing with anticipation. It wasn't every day that someone with the last name Trump quietly slipped into a boarding gate at Los Angeles International Airport. But there he was, Barron Trump, tall for his age, casually dressed in a simple gray hoodie jeans, and that unmistakable red "Make America Great Again" hat perched on his head. He moved with quiet confidence, clearly used to the occasional stares, but unaffected by them. The flight was bound for San Francisco, a routine route. Yet the atmosphere in the boarding area was far from routine. Some passengers whispered to each other, recognizing the youngest son of one of the most polarizing figures in recent history. Others shot disapproving glances toward the red cap he wore without hesitation. A group of teenagers snapped pictures from a distance, giggling nervously. Barron didn't seem to notice, or maybe he simply chose not to. As the boarding announcement crackled through the speakers, he picked up his carry-on and joined the line. A middle-aged woman behind him muttered something under her breath, just loud enough for him to hear. He turned slightly, met her eyes, and offered a polite smile as if to say, "It's okay, I'm used to it." Once aboard, the energy shifted again. Barron placed his bag in the overhead compartment and settled into his seat near the window. A flight attendant approached him, her expression neutral. At first, she was in her early 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor and a sharp gaze that scanned the passengers as if she could sense potential trouble. Her eyes lingered on the hat. "Excuse me," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Would you mind removing your hat during the flight?" Barron looked up, surprised but not offended. "Why is it against the rules?" he asked, his tone polite but direct. "No, it's not a rule," she replied, glancing around as if to gauge the reactions of nearby passengers, "but it might make some people uncomfortable. We want everyone to have a pleasant flight." Barron tilted his head slightly, considering her words. Then he said, "I'm sorry if it bothers anyone, but this is just a hat. It's what I believe in. I'm not trying to upset anyone." The flight attendant's expression hardened. "I understand, but I'm asking you as a courtesy. We don't want any disruptions." The tension was palpable now. Passengers nearby were pretending not to listen, but clearly hanging on to every word. Barron's calm demeanor didn't waver. "I'm not causing a disruption," he said evenly. "I'm just sitting here wearing a hat." The flight attendant's lips tightened. "I'll be back," she said before walking away briskly toward the front of the cabin. The murmurs began almost immediately. Some passengers whispered in agreement with Barron's stance, while others looked uneasy, clearly siding with the flight attendant. Barron remained composed, his gaze focused on the clouds forming outside the window as the plane prepared for takeoff. But something was brewing, and it wasn't going to stay quiet for long. Minutes passed, and the murmurs among passengers only grew louder. The flight attendant returned this time, accompanied by the lead attendant, a man in his 50s with a polished appearance and an air of authority. They both approached Barron's seat. The woman slightly ahead, her face a mask of determination. "Mr. Trump," the lead attendant began, his tone measured but firm. "We've received some concerns from passengers regarding your hat. To ensure everyone feels comfortable, we're requesting that you either remove it or stow it away for the duration of the flight." Barron shifted slightly in his seat, looking up at the two attendants. His expression was calm but resolute. "With all due respect, I don't see how a hat is making anyone uncomfortable. I'm not bothering anyone, and I haven't said a word to anyone since I boarded." Passengers nearby leaned in closer, their curiosity piqued by the developing standoff. A man seated across the aisle, clearly annoyed, chimed in. "Let the kid wear his hat. It's not like he's shouting slogans or anything." The flight attendant ignored the comment and pressed on. "This isn't about you personally, Mr. Trump. We're trying to avoid any potential conflict on board. Please understand, this is for the safety and comfort of everyone." Barron straightened in his seat, his voice steady but firm. "I understand your concern, but I have a right to express myself. I'm not breaking any rules. I'm just sitting here quietly wearing a hat." The tension in the cabin was thick now, the whispers turning into hushed debates. Some passengers supported Barron. Others sided with the crew, and a few simply watched in silence, uncertain of where this confrontation was headed. The lead attendant's polite demeanor began to crack. "I'm afraid if you can't comply, we'll have to ask you to leave the flight." Gasps rippled through the cabin. The man across the aisle spoke up again, his voice louder this time. "Seriously? You're kicking him off for wearing a hat? This is ridiculous." Another passenger, a woman seated 2 rows back, interjected. "It's just a hat, but it's a symbol. It's offensive to some people. He should respect that." Barron turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting those of the woman who had spoken. "I respect everyone's opinion," he said calmly, "but respect goes both ways. I'm not asking anyone else to change what they believe or wear." The lead attendant sighed heavily. "Mr. Trump, this is your final warning. Please remove the hat or we'll have no choice but to deplane you." Barron took a deep breath, his expression unreadable. Then with a slight nod, he began to gather his belongings. The cabin fell silent as he stood his tall frame, drawing the eyes of every passenger. He slid the strap of his carry-on bag over his shoulder and turned toward the front of the plane as he walked down the aisle. He didn't look back. He didn't argue or plead his case. He simply left his head held high, his red hat still perched firmly on his head. The murmurs began again as soon as he was out of sight. Some passengers expressed outrage at the flight crew's decision, while others nodded in approval, believing it was the right call. The atmosphere on board was electric, charged with a mix of emotions, confusion, anger, and unease. Outside, Barron stepped off the plane into the jet bridge where an airline official awaited him. But instead of frustration or anger, Barron's face was calm, almost thoughtful. He wasn't planning to let this end here, but not in the way anyone might have expected. As Barron exited the terminal, the chatter among passengers still aboard began spilling onto their phones. A woman in seat 16C opened Twitter, her fingers flying across the screen. "Unbelievable, Barron Trump just got kicked off my flight because of a MAGA hat. I don't even like his family, but this is insane." A younger man seated near the back posted a short video clip of Barron walking off the plane with the caption, "Free speech, not at 33,000 feet. Apparently within minutes, the incident began to spread online. Videos and posts poured in, each recounting the situation from a slightly different angle. Some painted Barron as a symbol of quiet resistance, while others accused him of being intentionally provocative. The hashtags #Barron Trump and #MAGA hat on flight began trending before the plane had even taken off. Meanwhile, Barron waited in the terminal, his carry-on bag at his feet. An airline supervisor approached his expression, a mix of discomfort and forced politeness. "Mr. Trump, we'd like to offer you a seat on a later flight." The man said, "We deeply apologize for the inconvenience." Barron looked at him, his gaze steady. "Thank you, but I'll make my own arrangements." He replied. There was no anger in his tone, just a quiet firmness that left no room for negotiation. He walked away from the gate, pulling out his phone, sitting down in a quiet corner of the terminal. He began typing. His fingers moved deliberately as if weighing each word carefully. Within moments he posted, "Removed from a flight today for wearing a hat, no shouting, no conflict, just a simple hat. I have no anger toward anyone, but I believe this is a conversation worth having, more to come." The response was immediate. Supportive comments flooded in from those who saw him as a victim of censorship, while critics accused him of leveraging the situation for attention. The polarized nature of the reactions mirrored the larger cultural divide the country had been grappling with for years inside the plane. The mood was tense. Some passengers who had initially supported the crew's actions now wondered if the situation had been handled poorly. The man across the aisle muttered to no one in particular, "They really just threw him off for wearing a hat." Unbelievable. The flight attendant who had initiated the confrontation stood at the front of the cabin, her jaw tight as she addressed a colleague. "I didn't mean for it to escalate like that," she said quietly. I thought it might cause a problem." "Well, it's definitely a problem now," her colleague replied, glancing nervously at his phone, where news alerts about the incident were already popping up outside in the terminal. Barron quietly left the airport. He wasn't planning to hide or seek refuge. Instead, he had something bigger in mind. Something that would shift the narrative entirely. By the time Barron stepped into his car and left the airport, the incident had spiraled into a full-blown media storm. Major news outlets picked up the story, each framing it through their respective lenses. Conservative commentators rallied to Barron's defense, calling the airline's actions an attack on free speech. Liberal pundits, on the other hand, debated whether the hat symbolism justified the decision. Social media was a battlefield. Hashtags like hat freedom to wear and hat respect the crew trended side by side with users, fiercely debating who was in the wrong. Some passengers from the flight began sharing their accounts with journalists, adding fuel to the fire. One particularly damning video recorded by a passenger. A few rows behind Barron captured the entire confrontation. The clip showed Barron calmly asserting his right to wear the hat jux, to post against the escalating tension from the flight attendant. The video went viral within hours, gaining millions of views. Comments ranged from admiration for Barron's composure to outrage at the airline's actions. "He's just a kid. This is ridiculous," read one comment. Another countered that hat isn't just a hat, it's a symbol of division. The airline did the right thing in the middle of this growing storm. Barron's tweet became a rallying point for his supporters. News outlets dissected his words, praising his restraint and maturity. Some even compared his handling of the situation to his father's more confrontational style, drawing a clear contrast that intrigued both fans and critics. But Barron wasn't interested in being a pawn in the culture war as the media frenzy reached a fever pitch. He stayed quiet, carefully considering his next move. His advisors and family reached out, offering support and guidance. But Barron insisted on handling it himself. "This is my experience," he told a close family friend over the phone. "I want to address it in my own way." Meanwhile, the airline found itself at the center of public scrutiny. Its social media pages were inundated with comments demanding an explanation. A hastily written statement was released, claiming the decision was made in the interest of maintaining a peaceful and comfortable environment for all passengers. But the damage was already done. Public opinion was deeply divided, and the airline's reputation took a significant hit. As the hours passed, Barron quietly prepared for what he knew would be the most important part of this ordeal. His response: he didn't want to fuel the outrage or escalate the division. Instead, he saw an opportunity to turn this moment into something constructive, something that could spark a larger conversation about tolerance, personal expression, and the value of respectful dialogue. The stage was set, the world was watching, and Barron was ready to speak the next day. Barron announced via social media that he would hold a press conference. The location was an unassuming community center in Santa Monica, far from the grandeur often associated with the Trump name. The decision to avoid a flashy venue wasn't accidental, it was intentional. Barron wanted the focus to be on his words, not the spectacle reporters flocked to the event cameras, ready microphones poised. The anticipation was palpable as Barron walked into the room wearing a simple navy blazer and no hat. This time he approached the podium with a quiet confidence that belied his age. The murmurs among the crowd ceased as he began to speak. "Good morning," he started, his voice steady but soft. "Yesterday I was asked to leave a flight because of a hat. I chose to wear a hat that represents something I believe in. I didn't argue or fight. I left because I believe in respecting rules, even if I disagree with them. But this isn't about me. It's about something much bigger." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. We live in a world where people are quick to judge, to label, to assume the worst about someone because of what they wear or what they believe. That doesn't mean we shouldn't hold each other accountable, but it does mean we need to start listening to each other, truly listening. The room was silent, every eye fixed on him. "I'm not here to make this about politics. This isn't about left or right. This is about the idea that we can disagree without disrespect, that we can have different opinions and still treat each other with dignity." Barron's words carried a gravity that seemed to resonate deeply. He recounted the events on the plane without assigning blame or vilifying anyone. "I don't hold anger toward the flight crew or the passengers who felt uncomfortable. I understand that symbols can mean different things to different people, but I also believe that our ability to coexist comes from understanding those differences." He ended his address with a statement that would make the day's story, but he didn't silence them. "We must choose respect over bitterness and communication over division if we are to be better than this." The room erupted in cheers as he left the microphone, and reporters yelled questions, but Barron just grinned, thanked the crowd, and left. The press conference was instantly sensational. News organizations repeatedly aired excerpts of his address that demonstrated his poise and maturity, and even some of his family's most critical detractors acknowledged his considerate approach. Social media was ablaze with comments, many of which praised his capacity to transform a contentious event into a chance for harmony. Barron wanted to spark a conversation that went beyond the cacophony, not gain notoriety or approval in polarization, and it appeared that he had succeeded at that moment. The public's reaction to Barron's press conference was swift, and news outlets broadcast excerpts of his speech along with panels of analysts from all political stripes analyzing every word he said. Some praised his poise and grace, calling him a voice of reason in chaotic times, while others remained doubtful, wondering if the incident and his response were part of a larger plan. However, the public's reaction revealed a different picture. Social media was inundated with posts from regular people offering support and sharing the Barron's address video, using remarks such as, "This young man just taught us all a lesson about respect," and 18 years old. Even people who disagreed with his family's political views acknowledged that his handling of the situation had touched a chord. One passenger on the flight shared a viral post, and while I didn't agree with the hat, I must say that Barron Trump was nothing but respectful the entire time. He didn't argue or yell. Instead, he simply stood his ground. What he said today took courage. However, the airline encountered growing criticism as their first statement was deemed inadequate and tone-deaf. In response, they issued a follow-up apology, acknowledging that further training for their employees, including the flight attendant in question, would have improved the way the matter was handled. Also released a personal statement apologizing for intensifying the situation and commending Barron's response. In the meantime, Barron's message started to spread nationwide, with organizations and schools beginning to use his speech as a model for civil discourse and conflict resolution. During a civics lesson, an Ohio high school teacher told her students that this is what leadership looks like: listening and standing firm rather than yelling or placing blame. The story even made it to a global audience, with headlines like "Young Trump Calls for Dialogue in Divided America" appearing in newspapers in Europe and Asia. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A teenager who had gained notoriety due to his family's divisive history was now praised for uniting people. Barron's life didn't drastically change. He resumed his normal routine and declined more interviews and media appearances. When a journalist asked him why he decided to take a back seat, he only stated, "I said what I needed to say. Now it's time for others to talk." The incident turned into a cultural hotspot, igniting discussions about striking a balance between individual expression and group comfort in homes, schools, and workplaces. Barron's involvement in it all served as a reminder that, when handled with humility and respect, difficult situations can turn into chances for development and understanding. And the lesson was occasionally evident to those who saw his acts on the aircraft, as well as in the days that followed. The loudest impact might come from the quietest voice. Weeks after the occurrence, the initial excitement subsided, but its effects persisted. Barron's news conference video was one of the most viewed on several platforms, and discussions over the incident persisted in social circles, workplaces, and classrooms. In the aftermath, it was more than just a hat. It had evolved into a larger discussion about the values of respect, tolerance, and communication in a world growing more divided. Barron's maturity and prudence won him admiration even from unexpected quarters. Traditionally critical publications' editorials commended his capacity to get past the controversy, one columnist noted. In a society where yelling matches are commonplace, the flight attendant in question quietly resigned from her job weeks later, and while some people condemned her actions, others expressed empathy, acknowledging the tremendous pressures and judgments that public servants deal with on a daily basis. In a shocking turn of events, Barron Trump released a statement wishing her well, demonstrating to us what it means to stand firm without becoming hostile. The airline declared it will be implementing new procedures after he stated that what's important is that we learn from them. His message resonated once more, reminding people of the power of forgiveness. Providing de-escalation training to all employees in order to stop such occurrences from happening again was a positive move for many. A small but important example of how conflict can result in positive change is that Barron's life gradually returned to normal. He carefully chose when and how to speak again, volunteering at a local shelter in Los Angeles and helping to distribute meals to those in need. Reporters who tried to turn his actions into a media spectacle were met with polite silence. For Barron, the incident's lasting legacy was not only in the discussions it sparked or the policy changes it inspired, but also in the straightforward yet powerful lesson Barron had shown that conviction could coexist with kindness and dignity. For many who watched from a distance, the narrative served as a reminder that standing up for what you believe didn't have to mean tearing people down. These values, respect, empathy, and the bravery to stand your ground without losing your Barron, encouraged everyone to think a bit more carefully before making snap judgments about someone based solely on their appearance or identity. As one of the passengers on the flight later said in an interview, Grace didn't simply exit the plane with his hat on, he left with his head held high. So frequently separated by words and symbols, Barron Trump sent a message that went beyond the controversy with his silent defiance. Sometimes the most powerful remarks are expressed with compassion rather than conflict.